This morning's sermon comes from the June Soul Matters worship packet and was written by Reverend Emilie Boggis. After serving a Unitarian Universalist congregation for 18 years, Emilie now works for Leader Wives, who support health and vitality for leaders in service. She still considers her work ministry as she accompanies clergy, congregations, and mission-based nonprofits through times of visioning and crisis. Her sermon begins with our story for all ages, which I'll sum up here. Each day, the rabbi's young son goes to the woods to pray. I know that God is the same everywhere, Papa, says the boy, but I am not. Again, can I get an amen? Do you know what amen means? The word itself has been traced back to an ancient Egyptian word, amat, and translates to ground of being. When we respond with an amen to something we've heard, it expresses that what we heard is connected to a truth or an experience we have known, like the earth supporting us. You always have a choice to say amen or not. Throughout this morning's service, I will ask you today, can I get an amen? And if what I've said resonates, if it connects with you, by all means, say amen. If not, that's okay too. It would be a very boring world if we all agreed with everything one another said. Returning to our story of the rabbi and his son, the son teaches his father a lesson. God may be the same everywhere, but we are not. There is such a thing as sacred space and sacred time. When we enter, it opens us to the divinity within and the divinity without. It helps us find our center. It may be available to us in all spaces and in all times, but some spaces sometimes don't work for us because we are not the same everywhere. I wonder, how many of us live our days like the boy, entering our homes, putting our work down, and going to our sacred spaces? How many of us, after a long day, release our burdens and make the time to find our center, our sense of what is holy? Not too many hands, I see. We enter our homes and an amount of work to do. Someone recently shared with me, almost in a whisper, I miss the slowness of the time in that first year of the pandemic. Is that wrong? It feels like we're back to breakneck speed. I've said it once and I'll say it again, the wisdom from Peter Drucker, the famous management consultant. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. Even with the best intentions to live a slower-paced life, America's dominant culture takes pride in its fast-paced urgency. That culture ate our intention for breakfast. Emilie Boggis goes on to share, my grandmother has a framed cross stitch on her wall that reads, to rest is to rust. We can sleep when we're dead. Welcome to Grind Culture, says Tricia Hersey, a performance artist and activist, a theologian and daydreamer. She calls herself the Nap Bishop, and her ministry, you guessed it, is called the Nap Ministry. Let me warn you, it's not just about naps. It's not about self-care. Podcaster Glennon Doyle's Podcaster Glennon Doyle Riley commented that calling Tricia Hersey's ministry a nap ministry is a little like calling Jesus' work a walking ministry. When people enter Tricia's nap retreats, they are often surprised. They think they've come to nap so that they can return to grind culture well rested. What people aren't expecting, Tricia says, is that she is calling you to resist grind culture, full stop. She not only hands you a blanket, she also hands you a metaphorical flamethrower so that you can burn the culture of grind to the ground. Rest is, in fact, resistance, and she is calling on all of us to join together and resist. The times are urgent, says Bayo Kamalafe. Let us slow down. Imagine a world where naps are essential to human flourishing. Can I get an amen? The nap bishop says, rest is a form of resistance because it disrupts and pushes back against capitalism and white supremacy. Both of these toxic systems refuse to see the inherent divinity of human beings, not to mention the planet, and have used human bodies, especially Black and brown bodies, as a tool for production, evil, and violence for centuries. Grind culture has made us, all of us, human machines, willing and ready to donate our lives to a capitalist system that thrives by placing profit over people, profit over the planet. Have any of you heard the news about cargo ships steaming right through whale habitats and feeding grounds and major pathways? Whales like the endangered blue whales living off the southern tip of Sri Lanka. They strike and kill whales repeatedly. An organization called Whale Safe has been asking large cargo ships to slow down to 10 knots when traveling through whale territory since 2014. Whale Safe uses buoys that listen for and identify the songs of blue whales, fin whales, and humpbacks, which alerts shipping vessels who are near the whales, urging them to slow down or reroute. In 2019, before the system's launch in Santa Barbara, California, 46% of vessels slowed down in voluntary speed reduction zones. With the new system, the percentage has risen to 60% in 2022. Another organization called Protecting Blue Whales and Blue Skies actually pays shipping companies to slow down for whales. The times are urgent. Let us slow down. Imagine a world where we are paid to slow down. Can I get an amen? The Rest is Resistance movement, says the NAP bishop, is a connection and a path back to our true nature. We are stripped down to who we really were before the terrorism of capitalism and white supremacy. That's when we learn that we are enough. That's when we claim our divinity. God might be everywhere, but it's nearly impossible to find our center in grind culture. The rabbi's son goes to the woods to find his center because the dominant culture stops him from experiencing divinity everywhere. Yes, his trip to the woods is an act of centering. It is also one of resistance, says Tricia Hersey. On Sunday, Emily Boggis wrote, our junior high class gathered to watch a Twilight Zone episode. You may be surprised that 12 and 13-year-olds will actually watch black and white television. They will. I think it's mostly due to our amazing snacks. The Twilight Zone episode is called The Obsolete Man, It is set in a future, not the one that will be, but one that could be, as the host, Rod Serling, tells us. We enter a scene where a man is put on trial for being obsolete, no longer productive, no longer worthy. You see, in the future, the state has banned books, and the man is a librarian. Therefore, the man is now obsolete. If found guilty of being obsolete, the librarian will be put to death because he now has no value. In his youth, he had been a carpenter. Producing furniture is valuable for the state. If he had remained a carpenter, he would not be obsolete. But the librarian chooses to resist. His method of resistance, reading. At the end of the show, the host, Rod Serling, does something unexpected. He reappears on the show to give the moral, saying, any state, any entity, any ideology which fails to recognize the worth, the dignity, the rights of man, that state is obsolete. You might recognize those words as they are in our first principle. We Unitarian Universalists affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of each human being. Rod Serling was a member of the Santa Monica congregation, and he wrote that episode in 1961, the same year that Unitarian Universalists voted to create and live by our principles. Tricia Hersey calls us to view grind culture through a similar lens. This dominant culture grounded in capitalism and white supremacy does not recognize the worth and dignity of either human beings or our planet. Any state, any corporation, any religion, any entity, warns Rod Serling, that fails to recognize the worth and dignity of life is headed toward a future in which it is obsolete. The times are urgent. Let us slow down. Imagine a world in which you are worthy just for being alive. You are valued. Can I get an amen? How many of us are exhausted? How many of us are facing an even more exhausting week? How ironic that we have lived with a deadly virus for 3 years that attempted to teach us to take our exhaustion seriously. We didn't listen because culture eats strategy for breakfast. In the last 2 weeks, wrote Emilie Boggis, both of my teenagers have had a virus, just your common winter virus. As my eldest got ready for school, she shared with me her symptoms: sore throat, aches, and fatigue, no fever. We tested her for COVID, negative. I said, I think you should stay home. Her response, I can't. I've got too much work to do. I countered, if you had COVID, you would be home for 5 days, period. Let me ask you, if you didn't have a lot of work to do, would you stay home? Her body deflated as she confessed, yes, gladly. I feel awful. She ended up staying home and slept for 6 straight hours. I texted her from work. I guess it's good that you didn't go to school. She replied, yeah, tell that to my math homework. We aren't allowed to be sick because the work never stops. The pace is unrelenting. If we don't do the work, we can't catch up. It requires someone else, our coworkers, our partners, to add more work to workloads that are unsustainable. Grind culture, says the Nat Bishop, keeps us exhausted, and we're addicted to it. If I told all of you that your practice for the week is to get 8 hours minimum of sleep per night, as I have done with folks, You wouldn't believe the resistance I hear. I just couldn't, they cry. I couldn't get it all done. That's the point. Keeping us exhausted is intentional because if we're exhausted, we won't have the ability to dream of new possibilities for ourselves, for our planet. It keeps us in a state of despair. One of the tenets of Percy's nap ministry is that naps are portals to our imagination. The seeds of our future exist in our imagination. When we nap, we are connected to our dream space. Grind culture steals from us that space of dreams and imaginations and futures. But just remember, oppression was imagined. Liberation can be imagined too. It will require us to take our imaginations back. It will require us to slow down. It will require us to rest. Let's begin right now. Sit in your chair with your back upright and your feet firmly planted, or recline for those of you at home. In a chair, on a bed, on the couch, in a hammock. Scan your body and recognize any tension. Breathe deep. Imagine a world without limits. Imagine a world without oppression. Imagine a world of liberation. Imagine a world where whales swim free without risk of harm. Inhale deeply from your belly. Hold. Exhale slowly. Open your eyes. And you can repeat this several times a day. Lady Nancy Ambrose was the grandmother of the prophetic mystic Howard Thurman. She was born a slave. As a little girl, the white preacher would come to the plantation and offer a service to her community. He was allowed to do this. Years later, she told her grandson about a moment that changed her life forever. The preacher looked her and the community in the eye and said, "If you remember one thing and one thing only, I want you to remember this. You are not slaves. You are children of God." For the rest of her life, Lady Nancy Ambrose held this truth inside of her. It was her center. No one could ever take that away from her. Her grandson went on to meet Mahatma Gandhi, the guru of nonviolent resistance. Gandhi taught Thurman to resist small acts of evil. Don't begin with the big evil in the world. Start small. Resist small acts of evil and work your way up to the bigger ones. Howard Thurman returned home to the United States, and his small act of resistance was to teach folks, especially Americans with their backs against the wall, the marginalized, people of color, the poor, to teach folks how to establish a sense of inherent worth and live from a place of dignity. Thurman was following in the footsteps of his grandmother. If the dignity of a person can be restored, if a person can claim their worth, he said, it stabilizes the ego, it increases self-esteem, and it gives one the courage to question oppression. How did he teach folks to do this? He taught them how to sit in silence, not unlike a nap. It seems like such a small act, and it is. But the writer Maggie Smith reminds us to remember geologic time, how the slightest shifts, imperceptible daily, carve canyons and make mountains. We have to trust that our small acts of resistance are making progress, even if we can't yet see it. The times are urgent. Let us slow down. Imagine living from your center every day. Imagine claiming your worth every day. Imagine your dignity restored. Can I get an amen? Because if we can do that, no one can take that from us. Rest is resistance, beloved. Emilie Boggis concludes, I've decided to follow in my grandmother's footsteps. I'm learning how to cross stitch. It's a gift for my future grandchildren. One day I will frame it and give it to them. It will say, to rest is to resist. Amen. This is the ground of our being. I invite you to rise in body or spirit